Okay, so tonight's video is kind of a weird situation. We have one of our Instagram followers came to us to install audio in his Accord earlier this year. Well, actually last year. So we did a basic upgrade, 1200 watt amp, some Stinger oxygen-free copper wiring. Reaches out through Instagram to let me know he needs wiring rescue. So obviously somebody else touched the car, which is fine. So since we saw the car last, he now has a doubled-in touchscreen, air ride installed, different set of subwoofers because you need to save some trunk space. So the disappointing part was the only piece of oxygen-free copper wire in the car was the original 4-gauge that we ran. So they upgraded the battery in the car to an excess power battery, which is good, but didn't bolt it down. So he was having issues starting the car and he was having current problems. So when we add additional current draw to the car, the battery, we like to upgrade the factory ground. Not only did they not upgrade the factory ground, but by leaving the battery unbolted, the battery rocked back and forth until it snapped off about 80% of the strands of copper. So now we have an air ride compressor and a 1200 watt amp drawing current through the body and then following back to the battery through a 4-gauge wire that has almost no copper left. So now that the factory ground is shredded, we upgraded to a 0-gauge ground from the battery to the body. Then we moved to the trunk where they did a nice little display for the air ride. If you're gonna make it look pretty, please make sure the install's solid first, because what's the sense of having fancy air ride and trunk that looks nice when the damn car doesn't start in the morning? I know, because there's a set of jumper cables on the passenger side floor. So we fixed the wiring under the hood. There was a fog light switch mounted under the hood, so we cut, soldered, and extended those cables, installed the fog light switch in the car. But then, after everything was wired up and we tried to fire up the system, the amp was going into protection. So I took out my trusty meter and took a look, and the reason the amp is going into protection is because they didn't check, and when we did the car originally, we used a 1200.1 2 ohm because it was 2 4-ohm subwoofers. They dropped in a set of 10-inch dual voice coil, dual 4-ohm woofers, and applied a 1-ohm load across the amplifier and shorted the amplifier out. And I guess the amplifier was unhappy with a 1-ohm load on a 2-ohm amplifier, so it wiped out the coils on the woofers. So the woofers metered normal, but when I switched over to the signal generator from SMD, and the woofers were playing, they were at below 0.5 ohm. So now the woofers have to be replaced, the amplifier has to be replaced, when all they had to do was read the model number of the amplifier. It was a 1200.1 2 ohm, and they would have known that they cannot use their 1-ohm load woofers. So this one's, take a look at the video so you can see exactly what's going on. So we'll call this one the upgrade to the downgrade. Carlos Ramirez, owner of NVS Audio in Roselle, New Jersey. Me and Chris are fixing this mess on this Honda Accord. So, on top of it being messy, it's unsafe. Check this out. It's good that they upgraded the battery, but you gotta bolt that down. That's dangerous. And then check out the fog light switch under the hood. It's not very convenient. This part looks good until you look underneath. Whoa. So that's where they thought a good spot for the fog light switch would be. Battery's not mounted down. And we have 4 wires tapped off the positive with no fuse. And then the wires running, getting mangled by the battery box, running by sharp metal, and inside the car with some more sharp metal. If that wire gets cut over there, it's just gonna burn because there's no fuse at the battery. Customer is only 1 speed bump away from getting stuck. Look at that. From the battery moving around, it broke all the strands off. He's left with less than a 1/4 inch of wire. That's the main negative battery post. Gotta make sure your battery's bolted down. This Sound Digital amp takes 4 gauge in. That's not 4 gauge, that's 8 gauge. So there's no way this amp's gonna do 1200 watts if they're running 8 gauge aluminum wire. We'll fix it. We're gonna run 4 gauge stinger. Clean this mess up. Oops, looks like we caught that just in time. We have a shorted wire that fused together. Okay, we have a 0 gauge, replacing the factory 4 gauge, soldered on both sides, upgraded the terminals, an official battery mount. That's not going anywhere. PVC plastic top to mount the fuse holder to. The fog light switch has a new home, nice and neat, tucked away, easy to reach. Not under the hood anymore. Did the best we could on this quick fix. So now we have 4 gauge wiring running to the amp. Clean up the power and grounds. So the more we dig into the install, the more problems we find. So realize why the subs weren't playing. This car came equipped with a Sound Digital 1200.1 2 ohm. They went ahead and swapped the subs for some DS18 subs, and it was a final impedance of 1 ohm. So that amplifier blew up, and we have to replace it with this one. So just because it's 1200, if you look at the end, 1 ohm is what's required for dual 4 ohm subs. You can't use that one. You got to use this one. A little bit of reading, a little bit of measuring. See? All it took was a meter to figure out that that was the wrong amplifier for this setup. We also went ahead and added a fuse holder. That way the air ride has its own fuse and the amplifier has its own fuse. That's why it's so important to have good test equipment. Even after switching the amplifier, the woofers are bad. We're showing a dead short across the whole frequency range.